Hey guys, what's up? Photonosity here. Welcome to another video, and today we're going to talk about low light. Now, low light does not always mean absence of light. It basically just means lowly lit situations, and it could be different in different situations. So right now I'm only being lit by this lighter, which is getting super hot. I'm at f1.4 ISO 6400, and it says I'm 2 stops underexposed. How's the autofocus looking? My low light performance might be different than yours because it all depends on how your lighting situation is. For example, what if I'm in this type of lighting? Right now, I'm only being lit by the tungsten bulb, which probably is gonna look crappy, but I'm at ISO 3200. But what about now? And this should look a lot better because I do have a proper lighting setup. Now, before I show you anything, let me just make it clear that my lighting conditions are gonna be different than yours. Therefore, the low light image that you're seeing in my video is not gonna be the exact same in your videos. It'll be similar. You'll get an idea of how it might look, but lighting affects a whole lot. All right, so this is how this video is gonna go. First, I'm gonna simulate my real world usage where I'm just out and about at nighttime and I'm shooting with available light at different ISOs as per the needs. And after that, I'm also going to do a side-by-side comparison of the R5 versus the R6 in 4K HQ, and I'm also going to compare the normal 4K on the side. That way you can see how the normal 4K looks compared to the 4K HQ, and how the 4K HQ on the R5 looks versus the R6's 4K. I'm also going to do some tests in 1080p as well. I'm going to play all the clips for you to see and form your opinion, and then in the end, I'll give my conclusions and my thoughts. So without any further ado, let's get started, shall we? Alright, so before we move any further, pause the video and let me know in the comments what you thought about that footage. That was basically me trying to simulate my real world use case where I'm going to use the lowest aperture that I possibly can and set the ISO depending on the lighting situation to get a proper exposure. Now, I know that some people want to see the ISO performance through the entire range, which is why I also did a side-by-side comparison of the R5 versus the R6 throughout the entire ISO range. So first, I'm going to do a test in my studio, aka my garage, and then I'll do it outside in a horribly lit situation. So let's roll that. All right, so what did you guys think about that? Please let me know in the comments below. Let's now take a little deeper dive into the footage. So just looking at the EOS R5's footage where I was shooting at night. Now the image is super clean, especially under 1000 or 2000 ISO. Like over here, it's very, very clean as you can see. Same thing here at ISO 400, it's just so beautiful. At 2500, it's still very, very clean. Let's take a look at another example at ISO 800. Now this image right here is so clean. I'm actually in love with the footage here. And even if you look over here, besides the car being super amazing, I wanted to show you that even in the dark parts of the image, if they're exposed properly, you're not gonna see crazy noise. And even if there is noise, it's acceptable, especially in lower ISO. So over here, you see like I did not crush the shadows. There's still a lot of detail. And if I were to zoom in at like 400%, there is a tiny little bit of noise, but again, that's not a bad thing necessarily. It's a very fine noise. Now this is a very interesting shot because here I exposed for the lights and my shadows were going to be crushed a little bit. It said that at ISO 100 I would get a proper exposure in the middle, but then I went ahead and I overexposed probably a stop more. So I went from ISO 100 to ISO 400. I had to bring down the highlights a little bit in post just so that I can retain the shadow detail. And as you can see, it's so clean, especially in the shadow area. There is still quite a bit of detail and it's still pretty clean. And I was easily able to bring down the highlights here. It is low ISO, but I just wanted to bring that up. Now this is something that I would consider a pretty high ISO, like 4000. Again, it's so clean, even at ISO 4000. If I were to zoom this in at 400%, yes, now I'm gonna see a little bit of noise over here. So like if I play it, it's not disgusting. But again, we're at ISO 4000. But if I zoom out and watch it as I normally would, you can't even really tell. Now again, the reason behind the 4K HQ looking so freaking good, even at high ISOs, is that it's an 8K image that's being downsampled into the 4K image. So everything is being shrunk. So that's why you're not gonna see crazy amounts of noise, which is pretty awesome if you ask me. Here's another example at 1600, again, super clean. Here are some more examples at lower ISOs, at ISO 400, 500. Here's one at 2500. Like, it's still a very, very clean image. So if I were to zoom in at 400% here, oh my God, that looks just freaking amazing. But yeah, there is some noise, obviously, but then again, it's not like horrible noise. It's a pretty fine noise. Now I can apply noise reduction to that. I chose not to because it didn't bother me. One more thing, if you didn't notice, I didn't choose this as a thumbnail. Sure, that would get me a lot of views, but I don't like doing that kind of stuff. But anyways, now here's another example of normal 4K that people said is garbage, don't ever use it and stuff like that, which kind of is surprising because when I do shoot in normal 4K at ISOs 500 or even 3200, it wasn't much different compared to the 4K HQ in terms of noise. So like if I play this right here, you can see how sharp the image looks, especially when there's motion in the shots. Now I can go ahead and apply some sharpening to this and it may look a little bit sharper even if you want to go ahead and do that, but I absolutely felt no need to do that. So that was just comparing the EOS R5 just by itself. So for my real world use case, I'm totally happy with how the R5 turns out, especially in ISOs below 4000. So now let's compare the EOS R5 with the R6 because R6 as it is phenomenal in low light. So let's look at different ISOs. So at 400, here's the normal 4K, 4K HQ, and the R6 is 4K. Now if I zoom it into 400%, there is literally no difference. Even with the 4K HQ and the normal 4K, there isn't much difference at all whatsoever besides the sharpness. But as I have said many times, all you have to do is add a little bit of sharpening and then it looks pretty comparable. And when you zoom it out, it's almost impossible to tell them apart. Now let's look at 800. At 800, again, it's the same. I did not see a difference. Let's look at 3200 because now we're jumping into the high ISO. So if I zoom into 400%, which is totally impractical, like I would never do that. But you can see the noise level or the noise pattern is pretty similar. You can't say that the R6 is significantly better. It is a tiny bit better, but it's not showing that much as of yet. 4K HQ versus the normal 4K, again, it's not a significant difference. It's a little better, but it's not significant as opposed to what people have said that the normal 4K is super noisy and garbage. For my test, it's not. Now let's look at something, let's look at 6400. At 6400, ignore my sleepy face here. Oh my God, I'm gonna change that. So, okay, now if I look at the noise pattern at, oh, I still look drunk. Okay, better. Over here, I mean, the R6 does look a tiny bit better, but it's not a whole lot, especially at 6400 ISO. Now the normal 4K versus the 4K HQ, it is starting to show a little bit more noise, but 6400 to 8000 is what I would push the R5 to. If I really have to, then I would go to 8000 or even 12,000. But if I can live by being below 6400 ISO, I would totally do that. Now let's take a look at even higher ISO, like 16,000. Now here is where the R6 is gonna shine, because anything above 12,000 from all my tests that I'm seeing, that the R6 is better in low light. But so as you can see over here, the noise pattern, I mean, here you see a little bit of color shift starting to occur, whereas the R6 is still pretty clean. And then the normal 4K also starts deteriorating at and after 12,000 ISO. But just if I zoom it out, it's still usable, but again, it's not the cleanest image. Now, if I look at 32,000 ISO, here you will see the R6 destroys the R5. Well, not completely destroys, but yeah, it destroys it, if you ask me. Like, the noise on the R6 is still manageable, but the R5 is getting a little out of control, quite a bit out of control, and the normal 4K is also looking pretty bad. But again, that's what ISO? 32,000. Yeah, I would never use that. But at 50, 1,200 ISO, I mean, yeah, you can clearly see the difference here, that the R6 is significantly better. You see a lot of chroma noise on the R5, and then the normal 4K also kind of looks crappy. But again, that's like super high ISOs. Now the 1080p image, I did not find a big difference. So let's look at 3200 ISO in 1080p. Again, there's not a lot of difference. Even if I zoom into 400% here, it's not a big difference, to be honest, because neither are being oversampled or downsampled. I think it's doing some sort of pixel binning or landscaping. I'm not sure, so I'm not going to say what it's doing. But they look pretty comparable. But even in 1080p, if I look at 16,000 ISO, you can see that the R6 is handling the noise much better than the R5. But if you look at the exposed areas of your image, they both are doing still pretty good. It's only in the dark parts of your image where you're going to see a lot more noise. But in the area where the subject is properly lit, it's still fine. Now let's look at 4K 120p. So if you look at the footage side by side, the 4K 120 FPS is still much better than the 1080p 120 FPS. But yeah, because this is 4K, this is 1080p, and then the 1080p 120 FPS on the R6 is not the best. Sorry about that. That is my wife. I can't control when she enters this fake studio. Anyways, now with 4K 60p, the R6 is going to be cleaner, even at 1200 ISO. So that was all in a studio with a control lighting setup. But what if you are in a horrible lighting situation, if you're an indie filmmaker, or you just don't have the luxury to carry your lights, or if you just happen to be in a situation where all you have is available light, let's just say from a light bulb. Now this is at ISO 8000, this is the R5. So if I play this, it's still pretty clean. But again, it's definitely, you can see the noise pattern over here. So if I zoom it in a little bit here at 200%, I mean, it's not that bad, but at 400%, you can really start to see it. Like right there, it's pretty noisy. But then if I apply noise reduction to it, right here, it's much cleaner. So even at 8000 ISO in horribly lit situations, 8000 is not a problem. All you have to do is use a little bit of noise reduction. It's not compulsory, but if you use it, it's better. Now compare the 8000 ISO on the R5 versus 8000 ISO on the R6. Real quick, ignore the white balance. I totally just messed it up. I forgot to change it. But look at the noise pattern. It's pretty similar, I would say. You can't say it's significantly better or worse. It might look a little worse because of the white balance. It's horrible here. I totally forgot, like I said before. But as it is, they're both equally good. Now, once you apply a little bit of noise reduction, even at 8000 ISO, it's very, very clean. So even for the R6, it's so freaking clean over here. It's not a problem at all whatsoever. Now, what about something like 40,000 ISO? This is something that I personally would not use, but I've gotten requests to test like super crazy high ISOs, for whatever reason. So now at 40,000 ISO, it's pretty bad. Even if you apply some noise reduction here, it's usable, but again, that's not something that I personally would do. Whereas the R6 at 40,000 ISO is holding much better. So as you can see here versus R6, it's much better. And if you apply noise reduction to the R6, it looks even cleaner. So that's that. So let's take a look at another example here. This is also only being lit by my porch light. It was super dim. Even at 3200 ISO, I couldn't get the exposure right. I had to really go to 6400 ISO. Now at 6400 ISO, I don't see a big difference. Now at 10,000 ISO, again, there is not a lot of difference here. And even if I zoom in at 400%, yes, you see that the R6 is a little better, but it's not completely like taken off just yet. But at 12,800 ISO, beyond this point is where the R6 really takes off when it comes to low light performance. So if I zoom in at 200%, you can see that the R5 is starting to show a bit more noise, and it's not going to be so good. So as we keep going higher at 16,000, again, the R6 is looking much better. At 25,000, you can clearly see here that the R6 is holding its ground much better. Look at the windows here versus here. Look at the hood. Overall, the R6 is definitely performing better in the higher ISOs. But it's like I said, until 12,800 ISO, it's pretty neck and neck, which is super surprising to me. Now this is at, I believe, 51,200 ISO. Like it's starting to look like really bad. But this is also bad, but it's still better than the R5, if that makes sense. All right, so that's that. So the R6 is already like so good in low light. What I did not expect was the R5 to be equally as good up until a certain ISO. That totally blew me away. Like honestly, I've been using the EOS R for the last 2 years, and I was just hoping the R5's low light capability is somewhat equal, if not worse, to the EOS R. But after I started using the EOS R in low light, the R5 in low light, I was just freaking blown like how much better it is compared to the EOS R. Now here's the EOS R's footage that I took last night after working out. This is at ISO 3200. Just take a look at this and see how grainy the footage is and how much detail you really have. I mean, it's not detailed. It's kind of like mushy, and it's not the best image if you ask me. So this is the 4K on the EOS R. Now let's compare that to normal 4K, because a lot of people have said that the normal 4K on the R5 looks significantly worse than the EOS R. It's mushier, garbage, don't ever use it, all of that stuff. I don't know why, but anyway, so this is the EOS R 4K. This is the normal 4K. Again, no sharpening applied over here. No sharpening applied, nothing. But just look at this at 3200 ISO versus this at 3200 ISO. Which one is better? I mean, now when you look at this side by side, clearly the normal 4K still looks a lot better in low light. Now, how about that compared to 4K HQ? Because, the normal 4K is absolutely garbage in low light. It's just gonna show a lot more noise, right? That's what we've been hearing all over the internet. So let's look at the 4K HQ. 4K HQ does look sharper, I'm not gonna deny that, it does look better, but how much better? This is at 400%, okay, this is at 400%, and this is the normal 4K. 4K HQ, normal 4K. 4K HQ, normal 4K. Now, as I've said before, if I wanted to add a little bit of sharpening, I totally can, and it'll start to look a lot better. Not a lot better, it'll start to look pretty close to the EOS R5 4K HQ. So here's another example of the EOS R 4K at 2500 ISO. As you can see, even at 2500 ISO, there's quite a bit of noise in the shadows. Well, it's dark here, but it's not so good. But if you look at the 4K HQ now, it's much cleaner compared to the EOS R. And here is the R5 with 3200 ISO. EOS R, EOS R5. If you want me to zoom it in at 400%, let's look at the shadows here. This is a good point. There you go. EOS R, EOS R5. So there you have it. So one more quick little test. Here is the normal 4K at ISO 500. This is at f1.4. So I'm using a really wide aperture here because if I have a 1.4 lens, why not use it? Especially in this situation. Now you tell me which is normal 4K and which is 4K HQ. This is clip A, same ISO, ISO 500 at f1.4, and this is the same thing again. So real quick, comment below with the timestamp what you think is 4K and what you think is 4K HQ. Now I'll just tell you that this is the 4K HQ, but with that, don't look at the detail and sharpness, but just look at the noise performance. Like, is this significantly worse as we've been hearing all over the internet? Like, look at that. Is it significantly worse? So here is the 4K normal 4K, and here is the 4K HQ. Honestly, if I'm not zooming into this image, I would not even be able to tell which one is what. Both look really, really good. This is at like low ISOs, but still. All right, so that would wrap up this video. Let me know what you thought about the low light performance of the EOS R5 compared to the EOS R and the R6. My final thoughts are that the R6 is better, but only after 12,800 ISO. That's when you really start seeing the difference. Now, what's amazing is that EOS R5, being a 45 megapixel sensor, is much better than the EOS R, and it still holds its ground against the R6 up until 12,800. After that, the R6 kind of takes off, and it really depends on what kind of noise is acceptable for you. And one little tip that I would like to mention is that if you can invest in Neat Video, this is a noise reduction software, if you can do that, it's probably one of the best $100 or $125 that you're gonna spend, because the noise reduction that it does it's amazing. I mean, I'm super happy with it, and their support team is also really good. This video is not sponsored, I'm not getting paid. I'm just telling you, if you have to use higher ISOs on the R5 or the R6, it doesn't matter, any camera, try to use Neat Video to just get rid of your noise, and it's gonna do wonders. Okay, but that would be a separate video. If you want me to do that, let me know. I will make another video of that. And if you also want me to compare the EOS R versus the R5 video quality in daytime, do let me know. I can do a comparison in all different modes like I've done for the R5 and the R6. And last but not the least, your low light performance really depends on the lighting conditions around you. So the lighting conditions here right now, the way they are, might not be the same in your studio or wherever you're shooting outside. So depending on that, how your shadows are exposed, how your subject is exposed, it all depends on what kind of noise you're gonna see based on how you expose your footage. I personally found overexposing C-Log half a stop to a stop yields better results than underexposing it and then raising the shadows in post, which is gonna give you more noise in the footage. Anyways, guys, that was it for this video. I hope you guys found this informative and it helps you make your decision which one to pick. Or if you were just curious, I hope this kind of answers your questions. And if you're interested in seeing more low light footage of the R5 with available lighting, I also shot a little sequence at my gym with only available lighting in the gym, which was pretty dim. That's gonna be up right here, so check that out and see what you think about it. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video and you learned something from it. And if you did, you know what to do. I will catch you in another one. Until then, peace.